Hey guys, back with another review. Today I am reviewing Nihan's portfolio. I don't know if I said your name right. I hope I did. If not, I am so sorry. But the feedback that she is looking for is mainly on storytelling and some of the visual design aspects of her work. Now she wants to hear the feedback from like a hiring perspective. A disclaimer: I've never hired someone or looked for someone to to interview, so I don't know if I will be the best person to give feedback in that perspective. Everything that I do point out or I say or give feedback on is based on my what I found while I was creating my portfolio and finding my first UX job. Also based on the things I've learned in the past year as a UX designer. So with that said, let's jump right in. Um, I'm gonna just do like a quick review in like the portfolio, but I want to spend bulk of the time in one of the case study that she asked for me to take a look at, which would be this edible one right here. So overall, the portfolio, it's super clean, nothing like too busy, overwhelming, which is always great. Just a really quick. I'm just gonna dip into this little blurb really quick. It's kind of like a common thing, pretty much like 99% of like junior or entry level UX designers have this blurb. It just kind of became, I guess, like a common structure. From all of the recruiters that I spoke to, pretty much they all say they don't quite read it. And also, a lot of them doesn't really give much value or describe who or what they can bring to the table really at all, including mine. I've never worked on mine because I figured it wouldn't give me that much of a result compared to the time that I need to put into it. So I decided to leave it to the last. But for those who do want to optimize this little blurb, just really dig deep and figure out how to best deliver value. So right here, it sounds nice, but I still have no idea what you can bring to the table as a UX UI designer. And essentially, that's the sole purpose of building a portfolio, right? It's a showcase what we can do for you, why you need to hire us, what can we bring to the table, what are some of the skill sets that I carry that is unique, right? And that can benefit the company. So for example, a former architect. So I've looked at it real quick. I know you mentioned this in your resume, you mentioned this in your about me page, but as a non-former architect, I have absolutely no idea what you do. On like a very big picture, like I know what architects do, but I don't necessarily know the skills that go in a day-to-day. I don't know what you do on a day-to-day. I don't know what are some of the skills and experience you gathered from being an architect. I could only assume, but then that means that you're bringing it up to chance for the assumptions to be correct versus connecting the dot for me and telling me exactly why you being a former architect, like what does that help you in being a better UX UI designer. So for example, I used to be a fashion designer, and in the beginning, that's kind of like just what I wrote, like, oh yeah, previous fashion designer. In my head, I knew why that would help me, be a better UX UI designer, but I never quite spelled it out because I knew, like, I didn't think twice about it because I knew in a way, like in a very subconscious way, I kind of figured everyone else does, which is not, it's not fair to expect everyone else to know. So instead of writing just a swimwear designer, I expanded on the fact that as a swimwear designer, I also need to know my user. I need to know what they like so that they do buy my designs, right? What do they need? What is the trend? Always staying on top of the trend, always doing my market research, always looking at previous collections and figuring out what is the best selling, what is the worst selling, and trying to figure out what makes it the best selling and looking at trends and all that fun stuff. There's a lot that goes in and that kind of does connect, that does have like a similarities to UX UI designer. So things like that. And like, obviously I would try and, find a way to write that in like a very short, succinct way. But spelling it out and connecting the dots for us would be a lot more successful. And this little part, discovered the captivating digital realm in my uniquely crafted portfolio. It doesn't Again, it sounds nice, but it doesn't bring any value. Like, just because you say that it's unique and it's captivating doesn't necessarily make it, right? It could be. I'm not saying it's not. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying typing it out like this doesn't do anything. It doesn't change anything. These are the opinions that the audience or the reader is going to form on their own as they're reading it. Instead, to bring more value into this little snippet, I would replace it with anything that's relevant and specific to your experience as a UX UI designer. For example, I think you mentioned it, or maybe I read somewhere in your resume that you are interning at a SaaS company. That's something that you can, write down. You can say a SaaS, UX UI designer who focus on XYZ. Like, that's a lot more specific. And the purpose of that is if there is a SaaS company and they're looking for someone who has that experience, you're kind of connecting creating a connections, a very superficial, but still they're like, oh look, she has SaaS, and that's going to be a little bit more effective than a sentence like this. I am going to jump into the case study of Edible. Something I did notice is that the link from the image and the view more is different. I'm assuming it is a iterated version of the case study. So this is what I'll go into if I hit view more. And this is the version that I see when I click the image. So just an FYI. She did give me a link to her case study that she wants some feedback in, and it does seem like this is the latest version. So hopefully I'm right, and I'm going to dive into this. All right, so just a context for everyone else so that's easy to follow. I'm just going to run through the structure real quick. So we have the title, Edible, what's it about, some information, some overview, and then here she kind of walks through the creation of the product. So some research, and then creating the information architecture and the user flows to prototypes, testing it, and then creating a high fidelity mark. So I read through in detail, and there were a couple of things that I wanted to point out. So let's start with things that I think are working very well in this case study. One is the cohesiveness of the colors. So for example, we have this mustard color up here, and that mustard color pretty much comes out like it's consistent throughout the entire case study. So we have it in the product itself. We have it, I don't know if this is intentional, but the color of his sweater to like just the post-its, it's in the persona. And just like it just sprinkles throughout the entire case study, including like this black. We see this very dark gray or black color, and that's the color that you use up here. And then you have your default black for the copy. And using very minimal amount of colors in the case study and using it consistently throughout the case study is a very easy way to make it feel cohesive and not so overwhelming and messy. Another thing I like is linking out detailed pages. So for example, here we have user interview. One way for those who wants to give them the option to dive into details but don't want to overwhelm the case study, linking it out is a great way, just like how she did it here. So in the user interview, she gave them an option to view the interview discussion guide if they choose to. Another thing I like is this double column. So on the left is mostly like navigational or more like a progress where we're at in terms of the product creation, and on the right is the content. I think it just makes it easy to follow. If you want to communicate where this is at. For those who are curious if it's necessary, I wouldn't say it's necessary. Most of the designers they know the process, and then also the process isn't as black and white. But if your goal is just to make it easy for us to follow it in terms of where the product is at, in the design process, then yeah, it's a good way, and I like it. Another thing I like is this two columns. So left is more about like navigation, more like where we are in terms of the creation of the product, and then in the right side we have the content itself. I I think, I mean, haven't really seen anybody else do this, but it's like a nice way for us to follow again where the product is at in terms of like the design process. And it also, I like the fact that it makes this content like width shorter, which makes it easier to read, versus if the copy is all the way from the left to the right. Like that's a lot of, like, my eyes can't track like that. I would literally have to turn my head. So making it smaller like this is easier to read, but also because you have this left and right, it doesn't look like there's a crazy amount of like empty space, especially for those who work in a very big monitor. Pointing out just like even small details that I like this recording of like a paper prototype. I think it's, well, one, I think it's fun, but two, most importantly, it communicates that you created a prototype and insinuating that you've tested it, um, without having to read like massive amount of copies. So I think that's what it's successfully doing, especially when you highlight for people who are confused. So that's what I really like about this. Let's dive into the small like visual details that I kind of picked up. One thing I would do is test the font. So I think this font works as a title when it's a bigger size, but for the body, it's a little bit, I wouldn't say I can't read it, like it's difficult to read, but it's not the easiest on the eyes. So test it, ask, a couple of other, like maybe friends or anyone, take a look at it and then ask them if like it's just as easy. Maybe it's just me. Another thing is aligning. So I see that the title on the left doesn't quite align with anything on the right, and it makes it a little bit floaty and messy. So I would just align this, like line define with an affinity map. Same thing up here, case study with editable. It's little details like that makes things look messy or clean. Like same thing here. It just, if it's not aligned, it just looks like it's floating by itself doing its own thing, but really it's not. It's saying from here on we're at the develop stage. So aligning that would kind of help with that floatiness. I think, again, this is going to be nitpicking, but I love this little like triangle. I think it's very fun. Only thing that bothers me is the image background is different from this. And yes, it's very small. It's a very small detail, but little details like this is what makes design feel refined or not refined. And let's dive into storytelling. So storytelling is a very big and very important part of creating a effective and engaging case study. In my opinion, it is the most difficult part about putting together a case study, especially as a entry-level UX designer. So when I say, so what is storytelling in terms of a case study, and why is it so important? To simply put, it's literally telling the story of how the product was created. And the reason why it's so important is because it really is the most effective way in communicating our capability as a designer in creating a product, right? It's showing the process and the steps that we took. Now, what differentiates a very mediocre storytelling and a very good storytelling is a good storytelling explains the why, the what, and the how, versus a mediocre storytelling only goes into the what. And or I guess the how, I guess that makes sense. And what I really mean about that is my first like sixth iteration of my portfolio, and then something that I see that's going on in this case study is we are, I don't, and I speak for myself, but I was so busy trying to prove that I knew the design process, and I knew how to do user interviews and make affinity maps and do personas, and I knew all the tools, that I forgot, or more like I didn't realize, that that's not the only important thing that goes into a product creation, right? At the end of the day, of course, we know how to, do personas and user journeys and all that fun stuff. Of course, that's literally the minimum we have to know in order to even qualify for a UX role. But what's more important than just knowing the tools is understanding why they exist, right? Why do we do XYZ? What we're trying to get out of it? Why do we make the decisions we make? Because the thing is, if you were to give the same problem statement to multiple designers, I wouldn't say all, but a lot of them are going to come up with different solutions, and some will be better than others because some are better at defining the core problem. Some of them are better at doing XYZ, and it's those things that we want to showcase in our case study. So it's less about the tools and less about what you did. It's more about how you did it, and it's more about why you did it. And if you want to talk about the what, it's less about what you did, more about what you got out of it. So with that said, let's dive into some sections, and I can kind of dive into that a little bit more and explain in with examples in more detail. On a very high level, and this is more directional, but in this case study, you're telling the story in sequence to the design process and not about the creation of the product. And in my experience, a case study is a lot more effective if you tell the story through the creation of the product instead. So what I mean by that is there's a more heavy focus on the design process and where you're at versus what you did that affected the end product. So like right here, it's more about that right now your biggest thing and your biggest pointer is you're in the discovery phase. And in order to discover what, not sure, but in order to discover, I did user interview, right? I interviewed 6 people. Cool. So discovered. And next section, it's less about the affinity map, right? Because I don't see anything, I don't see insights, I don't see anything. I just see that you did an affinity map. That's all I get from this section. So really what it is about is the focus is on, now I'm in the define stage. And in order to define what, I'm not sure. But in order to define, I created an affinity map, and I created personas. And then, moving forward, like delivering, it's less about how you came up with the user story, why you chose to do XYZ, why is this a story in the first place, where is this derived from. It's more about, this is the delivery stage. And in order to deliver, I created user stories, user flows. So this is, like I said, telling the story in terms of the sequence of the design process. Let's dive into the first couple of sections so that I can talk about what I meant more in more detail. So in this phase, like I said, right now it's more about discover. Now let's switch the focus to the product and the creation of the product, right? So a user interview, I mean, every bootcamp graduate knows this. The reason we do user interviews because we need to figure out the pain points and all the fun stuff from the users, and those insights that we derive from them will have a huge impact on the product. Now here, I don't know what those insights are. I have zero idea what you actually got out of the user interview. Was it even effective? Was it even useful? Like, did you even use any of this information when creating the product? I have zero clue because I'm not given any information. Now, again, I know I stated before about linking out, but this shouldn't be a primary way to communicate those details. This should be for like very, very detailed versions that, if giving the option for them to really dive in. But in the case study, we're going to give you the highlights, right? So here, instead of just saying that you did user interview, tell me what you got out of it. Tell me your biggest insight. Did you learn something that you didn't know before? Or did it kind of answer all of your speculation and your assumptions? Or what were, the most interesting finding? Anything that helped you create the product. And you don't want to be overwhelming. You just want to give a very highlight. Like, if I'm sure you got like 30 million insights. Don't give me 30 million. Give me the top 5 or the top 6 or whatever the top, important ones are, and highlight those. See, now, if you do it that way, now I'm no longer seeing like, oh, I did a user interview because I'm in the discovery phase. Now I'm learning about the product because now I'm seeing the insights that you derived. And now I can see, okay, so these are some of the pain points, or these are, XYZ. Now I'm beginning to learn the beginning of the creation of the product. So now let's go into defining. So, okay, you did an affinity map, but again, like, this doesn't tell me anything. It has no information. All I know is that you did an affinity map. So instead of just showing me a very like broad, vague chart, which I no hiring manager, recruiter is going to try and go into this and try and figure out what you got out of it, right? Instead, tell us, connect the dot for us. So in the affinity map, as you're doing it, what were the biggest groups? What were the biggest problems? What were the biggest common patterns? What was, what was an interesting find? What was an interesting, whatever it is, whatever really had an impact on the end product, that's what you want to focus on. So now if you change the section to kind of reflect that, see, now I'm not like, oh, discover and define. Oh, she knows how to use the interview. Now it's about the product. Okay, cool. So these are the insights. Oh, and these are the problems that surface. These are the patterns. Okay, all right. I see, where this product is going. Now let's move on to this section right here. So now we have the how might we questions and how might we, and so forth. So right now, the way this case study is there's a huge disconnect between how might we questions and the affinity map. I can't connect the dots. I have zero clue how you got the problem statement and how you got the how might we questions, right? I have zero clue on how you define what are the problems you're trying to solve because I wasn't given any. Now, if you were to, again, tell the story and connect the dots for me and take me step by step, it would be, hey, this is affinity map. I did an affinity map to synthesize my findings. From this, I saw a pattern where there's a huge pain point of, I don't know. It just took too much time to like look through the menu and having to call the restaurants to figure out if they have an item that fits their dietary needs. Another pain point is just like limited options. Every time, I don't know. I'm making all of this up. Every time I go out with my friends, I can't order anything because they don't have my specific things, and so I'd have to go back and forth. Or this problem, or maybe there's some, I don't know, something else. And then now that I as a reader know, okay, clearly from your insights, now the dot is being connected. So clearly from your interview in the insights, you derived all these pain points, and from these pain points, that's how you got the how might we question. Now these are the problems that you are trying to solve because these are the problems that you uncovered from your research. See how very different that is from what it is right now? And then after this, continue with the storytelling and continue with like taking a step by step on how the product is created. Now we go into the next step, which now there is a discontinue between like the user story. This is pretty much like all here. So this is the solution, right? So now you came up with the solution. What happened in between? Right, the brainstorming session. So now you have the, how might we question of how might we XYZ. Okay, but how did you end up with that problem? What was the brainstorming? What are some of the solutions that you brainstormed? And out of all the solutions, did you even come up with one problem and you stuck to it and that's it? Or did you try and explore multiple solutions and then chose the best one? What is your process like? And then also when you came up with the XYZ solution, why did you come up with, like, why was that a solution? And then in the explanation, it could be very superficial, very straightforward and obvious, or it could be a little bit more complex, like, okay, well, if I create this feature, it's going to solve this issue and it's going to solve that issue and it's going to solve this issue. And that's the what, like, the why that I was talking about before, right? Why did you do certain things? Why did you come up with that solution? Why did you create it this way? All of that is missing, and that is a very big part of the storytelling. And that allows me as the reader to follow along the story. Like, okay, this happened, and because of this, she did that, and because of that, she did this, and like to be able to connect the dots. I mean, this part right here is pretty straightforward, right? You've tested it, and then based on you're based on your findings and what people said, like, what's good, what's not good, they had issues with, then you iterated and created a wireframe. Like that's a good connection right there. So that is on a very high level what I mean by storytelling and telling in terms of like the progression of the creation of the product. Okay. Next thing I want to talk about and go into specific sections is about laying it out for us and simplifying the information, right? Not having the readers have to decipher and to kind of dig in to understand, like, what are some of the things that you wanted to communicate. So let's talk about this persona section. So one thing that really helped me out is going section by section and figuring out what is the main thing that I want to communicate in this section. And once I have that answered, it makes the rest of it very easy for me to figure out how I want to lay out the information, right? So this persona right here, what are you trying to communicate by showing the persona? Are you trying to communicate that you know how to create a persona? Like, you don't really care about them deriving any information off of it. Then you're just showing that you can create a persona. Are you trying to communicate some of the pain points that you're trying to solve, right? Or are you trying to communicate something else? And depending what your answer is, I would, question why, first of all. So for example, first one, I just want to communicate that I can do personas. My main question for that is why. Why is that important? It could be because I'm new and I just want to show that I can do personas. Okay, I'd question like if that's really important, if that's really worth it. That's up to you. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying understanding what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish with each section is very important. If it's a second answer, like I want to communicate, the pain points, which I think the pain points and the gains, which I think is the most important part about understanding my, my persona. Then if that's the case, then I'll go into details in a little bit. Then am I doing that well in this section? Am I communicating that well in this section? Another thing, what I mean by other reasons is, for example, for my personas, the more I question this, the more the answer to what I was trying to communicate was that at first I started out with a lot of personas, based on my findings. And the more I worked on my product, the more I realized that it's getting way too broad. Like, I just can't create a personalized product for a specific user if I'm trying to design for all these personas. So I went back and I filtered out my personas. So I chose to focus on one of them, mainly because she was the main, like, she would benefit from the product the most, right? And so that, like, filtering, that constant thinking about my personas, and then really like deciding to create a product, like a niche product that helps out like a very specific focus group, is what I was trying to communicate through that section. And that helped me figure out how to visually convey that. So after you do that little like exercise and figure out what you want to do here, so let's say your answer is, yeah, I really want to uh, communicate that, the pain points and the gain of my users, because that really, like, that helped me focus, and that affected my end product. If that's the case, then this section right here is not doing it justice. One, it's just way too busy, right? It gets lost. And because there's just so many copies, so many words, so many different things happening, there's boxes, and then there's pills, and then there's this, that I'm not going to read the pain points in the gain. So if, let's say, that is the main things that I want to communicate, I can get rid of this. I can get rid of, like, Sabrina, her name, the age, the occupation, family, all of that, might not matter. So get rid of all that, clean everything up, and just put Sabrina, pain points, and then maybe bulletin it, or shorten this a little bit to make it more scannable, and then gains, and that's it, right? Super simple. And then I would explain, um, maybe through a blurb, maybe through a visual, I don't know. But then I would explain, like, what about her? What about this affected the end product? Like, what did you get? What did you derive the most from creating a persona, right? That's what I would focus on. So depending on your answer to that question of what am I trying to communicate in the section, it's going to change how you display it. Same thing for here. The idea of lay it out for me, don't make me look for it, is I have absolutely no idea what you're trying to communicate in this section. And there's no way I'm going to read all these little post-its. So all I get is how might we questions, ideas, how might we top questions, and then best ideas. And so I see, okay, you filtered. That's what I'm getting out of this section. And again, asking yourself, what do I want to communicate through this section, would definitely change that. If you're just trying to show, like, your progress of, like, oh, this is, how many questions, and I filtered it out to these, and then these are my brainstorming ideas, and I filtered it out to this, then I think visually there's a better way to do this without, like, overwhelming it. Maybe it's more like instead of, like, one, the how might we question, the top questions, maybe it's one section, right? And maybe you can see, like, clearly it's being filtered through, and then ideas, and then, the best ideas are a different section. Whatever it is, there would be a better way to achieve that. Now, if you're trying to communicate something different, so it's less about the filtration and all that fun stuff, it's more about, like, no, you're trying to focus, you're trying to bring a focus into your main, how might we question. So if that's the case, then this will look completely different. It could mean like, I don't need to see all this. I don't need to see all this. How might we? It might just be 3 cards, and boom, those are your top main 3 how might we questions. And then that is going to be a lot more less intimidating, less overwhelming, and chances are I might read 1 or 2, right? Versus laying it all like this. I think that kind of wraps that up. It's a very high level feedback, but it's difficult for me to go into details because once you start incorporating more storytelling and really showing, like, the why the things, and a little bit more of the insights that you derived, I think your portfolio and your case study is going to look a lot different. So it's hard for me to dive into details now. After that iteration, then we can move forward and deep dive into sections and go into like specific things. And another thing I want to mention is I'm going to say this again. I'm going to say this every single time. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. Take everything anyone says with a grain of salt. Everyone has their opinion of what makes a portfolio good, not good, bad, excellent, mediocre. I am a true believer on not making iterations after every single feedback you get. Instead, try and get feedback from 3 to 5 people and then gather the most common themes and work on those first, right? A couple of reasons. One, because there's a million things we could work on, and sometimes it's hard to know what's more important than the others, what's priority. And another thing is, everyone has different opinions. So maybe when I say like something's not working, maybe that's just my opinion. You'll never know until you get someone else's, like a little pool of data. So with that said, thank you so much for participating and sharing your case study with everyone. I really hope that this will help a lot of other designers, as things like videos like this help me out. I learned a lot from watching other professionals or other people reviewing other entry level like case studies. And I think because a lot of us are going through the same things, and a lot of us are having difficulties with the same problems. But thank you so much. And again, let me know if you have any other questions. And I hope this was super helpful.